Welcome to this extremely special episode of Verified. Now, Verified was a show that was launched with the idea of introducing you to cool people who are doing very cool work. And we've talked about doctors who are doing charity right now. We've talked to lawyers. We've talked to people in sports. But today's guest is a rocket scientist, literally. Dr. Anita Sengupta is literally a rocket scientist and an aerospace engineer who, for the last 20 years, has been working with the space program. She's developed technologies that have enabled the exploration of Mars, asteroids, and deep space. Now, she's been at the forefront of the US space program. At NASA, her work helped developing ion engines that powered the Dawn spacecraft. I'll give you a minute to Google that and figure out what that is. She is also responsible for the supersonic parachute system that landed the Curiosity rover on Mars in 2012. Now, all of the amazing work that she's been doing, she's also among the first women of color to lead projects of this size in that space program. And she's now working on urban mobility, which is basically moving people from one part of the planet to the other without burning holes in our system with fuel and noise and things like that. Is there anything you cannot do, Dr. Sengupta? This is, I mean, I was just reading through your profile. It's amazing. What an amazing career to have had. I mean,
thank you very much. I don't know how to roller skate.
You don't know how to roller skate? We were just talking about the things that she cannot do. Apparently, she cannot roller skate. Tell us first what you're working on right now.
So right now, I've actually started my own company. So I'm a co-founder and chief product officer for an urban air mobility company. So what we're trying to do is revolutionize transport within cities. And so instead of thinking about traffic and moving around a city in 2 dimensions, we want people to think about it in 3 dimensions. Because you can view the sky as having highways in the sky. And so we're actually developing a brand new vehicle technology, which is an electric vertical takeoff and landing tilt-wing aircraft, which will operate on batteries to reduce the carbon footprint of air travel.
That way.
Yes.
Okay. So you don't need a runway, and you don't need a sort of an airport to actually.
You don't have to. So you could think of using existing heliports, the tops of buildings, parking lots, any place where you have a large enough of a footprint to come down vertically and also take off vertically.
And once you get this started, and like all movements in science, this would be the jumping off point from where people will then take it to the next level. So you're eventually, what you're looking at inside your head is a world where fewer and fewer of us are actually taking cars, and we're actually moving around in these vehicles, the Jetsons.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the reason to do it is because it's really inefficient to have one person driving around in a vehicle. So you want to have shared ride services. And so with a system like ours, it carries 4 passengers, 1 safety pilot. So it can be 2 couples, a family, or just a bunch of business people who are getting together, going from point A to point B in an urban location, or going from an urban to suburban location. But ultimately, the only way we can address climate change is to reduce our CO2 production. And therefore, all of our modes of transportation need to be shared, and they need to go off of grid-based power, which comes from renewables.
You've spent the last few days in Bangalore and then in Mumbai, cities that desperately need help in this direction. Is India perhaps prime target for something like this? Is this the area where things like this should, like we've done with other technology, perhaps leapfrog and go straight to it so that...
I actually think so. So I actually live in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is an enormous urban sprawl of a city. It's kind of like Mumbai in many ways in terms of its size, the fact there's different neighborhoods. And the biggest problem in Los Angeles is congestion. Congestion on the ground, which then couples to congestion in the air. And I think all of Indian cities have that similar problem, a lot of cars on the road. So it really is the perfect place for it. And there's also a lot of tall buildings, right? So there's also ways that you can utilize the existing infrastructure to facilitate this type of travel.
And you've also worked on the Hyperloop. You know, I know that Mumbai and Pune are considering putting one in there as well. How important is it, if I just take you back to what you said about climate change, and I also want to point out that research shows us that as of today, 7 out of 10 of the most polluted cities in the world are in India. And how desperate is the situation right now when you look at it as a scientist who's studied our world, our Earth in comparison to other planets? How bad is it?
So I think it's something that we can measure, which means it's having a direct impact on our lives and our climate. And I think you can take a look at how the temperature has changed over the course of the past 50 years. And you can look, even in my memory of being a child now, how weather patterns have changed in the East Coast of the United States, in the West Coast of the United States, in Europe, where a lot of my family also lives, right? Weather is changing, temperatures are getting warmer, winters are getting colder, there's more precipitation, there's more winds. So we know that it's happening. The good news is that it is due to greenhouse gases, but the good news news is that greenhouse gases have a certain amount of time in the atmosphere, resonance time. Eventually they'll come down, which means that if we stop producing the greenhouse gases now, we can actually fix the problem for the future.
So the two things that people say, first of all, is that, oh my God, it's such a massive problem. What can I do? There's nothing. There can be something can be done, is what you're saying. It's
Yes.
not too late. It's not all lost.
Oh, not at all. And we can use technology, which actually stimulates the economy, creates new jobs, creates new sectors, which actually helps society at large, and also fix the problem of climate change with electric aircraft, VTOL aircraft, and hyperloops, for example.
And what about those who say, oh my God, it's so cold today in Washington, some global warming would have been nice?
Well, so if you are an engineer or a scientist, you understand the concept of energy, you understand the concept of turbulence. So when you have more energy in the atmosphere, it actually creates incredible highs and incredible lows and a lot of precipitation and winds in between. And then that results in tornadoes and hurricanes, right, which has devastating effects on societies. And there's a huge cost in order to fix, facilities and buildings when those things happen.
Also, talking about the rest of the environment, the green patches that shouldn't be at this, have we reached a point now where we need to treat our forests and our green patches as,
Sacred.
absolutely sacred? Exactly. Is that the way? Is that the way science would look at it at this point? Have we reached a, sort of a flashpoint?
I think so, and I think the U.S. has done a really good job at creating national parks, for example, where they take parkland. They also create state-level parks, which protects those areas, both for human beings to enjoy them, both to ensure that you have enough trees to be able to collect CO2 from the atmosphere, and also to protect the habitats of the animals that live there. So I for sure would not want to live in a society where I don't have a diversity of animal life, right? So it's really important that we do that because we're not the only inhabitants of this planet, right? There are many others. And as a space scientist who spent years looking to find out whether or not there's life on Mars, it's ironic that we're not doing stuff here at home to protect our life here.
So I want to talk to you about that and some of the amazing work that you've done, Curiosity, and you designed the parachute that helped Curiosity land on Mars, which is a really tricky thing to do because it's a different atmosphere. It's different territory on the ground as well. Tell our audience what the challenge was, as simply as you can.
Okay. So the challenge of landing something on Mars is it's actually really simple in the sense that it's very, very far away. You're coming in through the atmosphere at really, really fast speeds, like 20,000 kilometers per hour. And the entire job of the landing system is to slow you down from 20,000 kilometers per hour to about 5 kilometers per hour, right? That's it. You got to do that. And you have to dissipate all that energy in a really short period of time, 7 minutes, which is called the 7 minutes of terror. And so because of those fast speeds, it imposes aerodynamic loads, it imposes deceleration loads, and there's no way to simulate that environment, that entire sequence here on Earth. So when you design it, you have to make sure that it's going to perform correctly, it's not going to fail, it's going to survive the very first time it has to do its job when it gets to Mars.
And that's an expensive thing to fail, right? If the parachute fails, you lose the rover. And the rover is an expensive sort of automobile to put together.
Definitely.
And you worked on it for, what, 5 years?
Yes, for 5 years of my career. And so the parachute is one portion of that overall descent. It's a portion of the supersonic descent where you slow yourself down from about 2 times the speed of sound on Mars to speeds below the speed of sound, when at that point you've basically hit terminal velocity and you do the rest of the descent on retro rockets. So the parachute, because it gets deployed in a very thin atmosphere, but at very fast speeds, experiences something called an aerodynamic instability, which causes it to look like a jellyfish. So basically it inflates and collapses, and that causes a lot of stress because it's made out of a fabric material. So you have to make sure you understand that environment and you make it strong enough so it survives, because it is a single point of failure. If it didn't work, then the mission would come crashing down.
Gosh, and congratulations
Thank you.
for that successful mission. But you worked in other stuff as well. And again, I'm going to try and say this in words that my audience and I will understand. You then went on to simulate and create the coldest place in the universe?
Yes.
Why?
So it's an interesting, actually, connection to India. So back in the early 1900s, a very famous Bengali scientist, Bose, had a working scientific relationship with Einstein, and Bose created something called Bose-Einstein condensation and the physics associated with that, where he theoretically figured out that a very dilute gas at incredibly cold temperatures, just above absolute zero, would experience a phase change. So just like we have gas, which then turns into a liquid, which then turns into a solid. It goes through these phase changes. He theorized that if you took gas in a really low density environment, took it down to really cold temperatures, it would form something called a Bose-Einstein condensate. There was no way for Bose to actually prove that state of matter until the advent of lasers about 50 years later, maybe 40 years later. When those lasers were invented, people figured out, oh, we can actually use lasers to cool atoms to see if we can create one of these states of matter. They were able to do it. They won the Nobel Prize. And what we see is at these temperatures for a gas of bosons, just above absolute zero, they behave in almost a perfect way, and they form a superconductor and a superfluid, which has a whole bunch of interesting technology applications, let alone it's pretty amazing.
Well, that's really cool. And that's really, you know, the sort of partnership between theoretical physics and practical physics, which is what you do. We have a lot of people in India who become engineers, and a lot of people in India who aspire to engineering, although they might not actually, you know, become technical engineers when they graduate. They do an MBA and then wind up in somebody's office. But you find you've gone around the world talking about how engineering is a fantastic place for a young person to be.
Absolutely. And so my father actually got his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering right here at IIT Bombay many, many years ago. So I always had him as an example of what it means to be an engineer, what it means to be a problem solver and a critical thinker. So I knew that I wanted to be like that when I was older, but I was so interested in the space program that I wanted to become an aerospace engineer so I could facilitate that. And so I do believe that the training that you get with an engineering degree, whether or not you go into law or medicine or into business, trains you how to think in a way that you probably couldn't get from other degree programs. And the number of people that I intersect with now, sort of on the business side and the science side in India, who are trained as engineers doing something else is amazing. And I think that makes them a much more informed customer and a better manager and a better leader. So I'm a little biased, I guess. But
well, that's fair enough. We have a lot of people in our team who trained as engineers and then decided to become journalists. But you actually decided to become an aerospace engineer very early. You did your undergraduation, your post-graduation, your master's, and your PhD in aerospace engineering?
Yes.
Why?
Because I wanted to facilitate the exploration of space, which I was able to do for the first 20 years of my career. And I actually think that I like to think of the universe as opposed to just planet Earth, as opposed to a particular country. And I like to understand my place in the universe. And one of the best ways to do that is to actually create spacecraft that will go and explore other planets. So exploring Mars, exploring Venus, exploring deep space, or even using the International Space Station with the Cold Atom Laboratory to explore something called a BEC, which actually has an analog to the Big Bang Theory.
That's really cool. So tell us where, I mean, obviously this is shooting in the dark, but there are so many things about the universe that we still don't understand. We don't understand dark matter as much as we would have liked to.
Yes.
We haven't fully figured out the continuum yet. We haven't fully figured out the black holes yet. Where do you think this is going? How much of this is undiscovered as far as you're concerned? What would you like to have, you know, to figure out in your lifetime at least?
So it's interesting that you say that, because when I give my presentations for science communication, I always show a quote by Socrates. It's my favorite quote, which is the only thing that we know is that we don't know anything, right? Because it shows humility. It shows the desire for human beings to learn and to understand. So the more you understand as an individual, the more you realize you didn't know. And so, for example, when I was first starting to teach as a university professor, and I had to teach, you know, dynamics to my students, I realized I need to dig a little bit deeper into what is gravity, right? So gravity, we all think about it as a particle force, and it actually isn't. It's the curvature of space-time. So that then took me to another place, like, well, I need to understand that a little bit more. So I'm a lifelong learner, so there'll never be a point where I'm like, I'm done. But what I do is roughly every 5 years or so, I try and do something very different. So which is the reason why I left NASA to go off into green transportation, now into aviation. So I keep on learning, and I become a better engineer and manager, and because of it, I think. And then I can give back to society by speaking.
You still teach, though?
Yes.
You're still active as
I'm a research associate professor at the University of Southern California. So I teach undergraduate and graduate classes.
So I remember reading somewhere that you were very inspired by Doctor Who, the television show. Doctor Who's an alien. Do you believe in aliens?
I do believe that it is probabilistically impossible that we are the only life in the universe. It just doesn't make any sense. There's too many stars for there not to be planets in the vicinity of those stars that have formed organic molecules, which then would evolve into some type of life. I don't know whether or not we have other life in our solar system in the form of, you know, bacteria or single-celled organisms. Certainly that is a huge emphasis of space programs around the world, whether it's the US or India or Japan. So I think it's a really exciting goal to look for that life, to look for evidence of past habitability, present habitability on Mars or Enceladus, for example. We haven't found it yet, but we're still looking, and I hope we find it.
So basically you're saying it would be pure hubris and arrogance for us as human beings to assume that we're the only ones here.
It's illogical, as Mr. Spock would say.
It's illogical. So there is one theory that the pyramids in Egypt were actually built with the help of someone else, because at that time, as human beings, we didn't have the technology to move, brick and rock of that size.
I probably don't believe that, and I think there have been many research teams, like
Yes.
from an anthropological perspective, that have gotten together with engineers and
figured it out.
architects and figured out how you can do it. So there are ways to actually do it. Same thing with Stonehenge.
So I also want to ask you a lot of other things, but first let me just quickly get this out of the way. There is a general view that women scientists don't get their due, and it's a lot harder to get started and taken seriously. And it is a space, or it is a career that has perhaps not received as much attention as other careers in terms of evening out the playing field between men and women. Is that something you experienced?
Very much so, unfortunately.
Could you give us some examples of what that was like when you started off?
So I think what happens is when you don't have a lot of women in a field or any kind of underrepresented group, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy where young people, when they go and they take a look at the media and things on TV, they say, oh, these people don't look like me, I can't possibly have that job. And I know many young girls that I speak with who say the same thing, well, I don't think I could be an engineer because they don't look like me. So that's one of the reasons why I do the public speaking. And so I think because of that, the system is kind of already set up against you. And I think the best example I would give is it took me probably 12 years into my career before I actually got a mentor. And it was only when I was sitting at a conference listening to the keynote speaker say, oh, this mentor helped me with this, and that mentor helped me with that. Like, I've never had a mentor, and I've been working for 12 years, right? So you need those kinds of connections to the establishment to be able to help guide your career from a what do I do next perspective, and also to give you opportunities, right? Because networking is important. So I think in those ways, sometimes the deck of cards is stacked against you. And so it's unfortunate, but the whole reason why I do what I do with public speaking, with speaking to children and students, being active on social media is to give them an example of the fact that you can be a woman of color and be successful in these fields.
Did you experience, when you say a woman of color, did you experience any sort of perhaps pushback or mild racism or real racism while you were at work?
So I think both in school and at work as a female, and I probably can't differentiate the two between being Indian and being a female, sometimes people don't listen to you, sometimes people talk over you, then there's the term like mansplaining, heap-eating.
Yes.
That happens all the time.
That happens to rocket scientists.
All the time. Yeah, and it's very sad and it's frustrating. I honestly think people don't even know that they're doing it. So I think when you see situations like that, you actually, whether you are a man or a woman and you see it happening, you should point it out, call it out and say you shouldn't do that, or you just repeated this person, or she just said that. So I think there are ways that you could make a difference there. But really what it comes down to, though, is that because you don't have enough diversity in the workforce, in aerospace, in IT, and computer science, you just don't have that fairness aspect. So if you got to the 50%, the gender parity mark, a lot of the things actually go away because you wouldn't do that if 50% of your colleagues were women. It just wouldn't happen.
And what advice do you give, and you teach still, so what advice do you give younger women who are now entering that space? If you have someone really young come up to you and say, I want to someday work in NASA, what would you tell that person?
Well, so I'm a very optimistic person, and I want to encourage young people and underrepresented groups to go into these fields. That's the only way we're going to solve this problem of lack of gender parity, lack of ethnic diversity in these fields. I will always be honest, though, when they ask me what was your experience like. But I think the reason why you do something is because it's difficult, right? You don't do it because it's easy. And so sometimes there are technical challenges, sometimes there's societal challenges, and those are things that will make you stronger as a person as a result. So I think I'm a better leader, a better manager, and a better engineer because I had to be successful because of the differences in who I am.
So there is a saying, of course, that women have to work twice as hard for a fraction of the pay just to be counted in a room, and then to be successful in that room involves a tremendous amount of effort. Is that something you agree with? Is it something you've seen happen around you?
Yes, it's something that I've experienced, but I also have a very strong mother who basically said to me as a little kid going forward, there's no such word as can't.
Sure.
So there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't do something just because it's difficult. You keep on trying until you're successful.
But we have some messages for you on our Facebook page. Sonali Henry says, this is a message to the men who want women to only stay home in Indian society. She's inspired many, many girls across the country today. So that's for you. Thank you for that. PV Menon says, very motivating program for youngsters. Thanks for airing this. Please bring more programs like this. Well, we ask her to keep coming back like this. But so you like Doctor Who and you like Spock. Have you ever seen The Big Bang Theory?
I have, but
Okay.
not very often because I'm not a fan.
You're not a fan. You don't believe that that sort of programming is good for, good for the community or the scientists in general?
No, I don't, because I think it actually presents a stereotype of what an intelligent person is, that they're geeky, nerdy, or socially awkward and have difficulty making friends and speak strangely. I don't think that actually represents most scientists and engineers that I work with.
Yes.
So it actually creates the stereotype, and then there'll be some young people as a result who will be like, well, I don't want to be like that because they're strange. So I'm not going to go into that field. So I'm completely opposed to that. I think it's important to present images of the whole range of people who could be scientists, which include people who ride motorcycles and fly planes, or people who are more socially awkward.
You ride motorcycles, and
Yes,
you
I
fly
do.
planes as well. What motorcycles do you ride?
I ride a Yamaha R6, so it's a sport bike.
Nice. I would have taken you more for a cruiser person.
Oh, no. I like things that go fast.
A quick question about India's research abilities. We have a great space program in ISRO that's been doing fantastically well, perhaps also pioneering what Indians do best, which is figuring out how to keep the costs really low and doing the same thing. But in terms of theoretical research and academic research, do you think India could do better?
I guess I don't keep a tap on what the funding expenditure is, but I can tell you that the Mars orbiter mission, which I followed very closely, was amazing from a scientific perspective, from a technical achievement perspective, on such a low cost. So I'm actually very impressed by what the Indian space program has accomplished. And I think, in general, India has such an emphasis on engineering education and scientific education that I think it actually gives them a leg up on many other countries.
All right, we have unfortunately run out of time, but this has been a brilliant half hour. I've been so inspired, and I'm sure a lot of people who've seen this show on Facebook and on television will track your career more closely, figure out what you're doing, and I wish you great luck in saving the planet.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.